Good evening, everybody. Hi, welcome to the Brooklyn Museum and the Sackler Center, and this last conversation in this spring series on states of denial, the illegal incarceration of women, children, and people of color. I'm here, and I'm flattered to be here in Elizabeth Sackler's stead. Of course, I can never replace our fearless leader, but I'm going to try my best to channel her indomitable spirit. She is, as you know, the chair of the museum, the founder of the Sackler Center, and the instigator of these conversations. So she's pretty impressive, and I will try to bring to my introductory remarks her energy and her enthusiasm. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. I think that this is going to be a fantastic conversation. And I think that I was asked to introduce the moderator because I've worked in criminal justice for quite a while. I graduated from law school a long time ago in 1976, and my first experiences in the law had to do with working in prisons. I volunteered to help the lawyers who were representing folks who had been charged with murder in the Attica uprising. Of course, it turned out that upon further investigation, the murders were committed by the police and guard who were brought in to put down the uprising, and that didn't come out for quite a while, but it was quite a revelation for me as a young law student, and I began at that time to be interested in the idea of incarceration, of doing prison work, of wondering what incarceration meant to our society, questions about who do we incarcerate, why do we incarcerate, for how long do we incarcerate, what is the point of incarcerating, is it different for women, what are women's experiences like, what are the experiences of women in this country like as compared to experiences of women in other countries. And I think some of those questions are going to be tackled tonight in our conversation. So I've continued to work in criminal justice, and I've continued to be interested in those questions. I worked, my second experience in law school was in a clinical program called the Women's Prison Project, where we traveled every week up to the Bedford Hills facility and represented women who were incarcerated for long periods of time at the Bedford Hills facility, which was at that time the only prison for women in New York State. And of course, we tried to help people stay in contact, mostly with their families. That seemed to be one of the major concerns that women had, was how to stay in touch with their children, how to stay in touch with their families. And just recently, sort of things come full circle. About a year ago, a client that I have been representing for quite a long period of time, who had been convicted of killing a child who she was taking care of in her own in-home daycare center. And I was, with my clinic class at the New York Law School, able to convince a judge that she was wrongly convicted, that it was an accidental fall, and that the scientists and the doctors who testified at her trial really didn't provide the jury with science. They provided the jury with their prejudice, their beliefs, and the defense counsel had not really had the education and the experience and the knowledge to do a good job of cross-examining those experts. So my client spent 10 years in jail, convicted of a homicide that was probably not a homicide at all, but was an accident. And we wonder, how often does that happen? How often are people imprisoned because other people jump to conclusions and other people don't do a good job either prosecuting or defending or judging? How many people are in prison because they have in fact committed crimes, but because they were in duress when they committed crimes, because other people encouraged them or forced them or pushed them or bullied them into committing crimes? And were those defensible offenses that people didn't learn to defend properly? So there's so many questions. I can't wait to get into this conversation. And so with little ado, I will turn the mics over to our wonderful narrator, our moderator, Marie-Claude, who will introduce the panelists. Before I do that, I want to just say that There'll be a conversation on the stage, and there will be time at the end of that conversation for your questions. We'll probably reserve about 15 minutes. There are mics on the side, so when you ask your questions, come up to the mic so that the whole audience can hear your questions and the panelists can respond. And I also want to... We missed your name. My name? Maybe I never gave it. My name is Adele, like the pop star. Bernard, not like the pop star. So Adele Bernard, sorry, and thank you very much for asking. I want to be sure to thank, before we get going, the Brooklyn Museum for hosting this series. It's wonderful to be having these kinds of conversations about criminal justice and about women's issues here in a museum where we celebrate the best that our community and our life has to offer, and to connect that with the energy of people working in criminal justice who are also creative and bringing their emotion and connecting community to individuals. I want to thank the staff of the museum and the staff of the Sackler Center, the Cyrus Vance Center for lending us Marie-Claude and for all the work that they do, and the Novo Foundation, whose grant has provided us with this opportunity. So with no more ado, Marie-Claude, Jean-Baptiste, come on up and introduce the members of your conversation, the wonderful panelists who have traveled here today.
Thank you, Adele. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel on women in Jamaican prison, local and global implications. We have a truly impressive group of panelists tonight who are really leaders in their fields, working in the trenches, looking at these issues, trying to get a better understanding of women imprisonment, and coming up with ideas for improvement in Jamaica and also here in the United States. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists. Next to me, Elizabeth Brundige. She is Assistant Clinical Professor of Law at Cornell Law School. She also serves as Assistant Dean for International Programs and is the Executive Director of the Avon Global Center for Women in Justice. She also founded and directs the law school's Global Gender Justice Clinic. Liz is also leading a research that the Vance Center, the University of the West Indies, and Cornell are collaborating on which is a study of the causes and consequences of women imprisonment in Jamaica, and we'll have a chance tonight to hear more about that work. Next to Liz is Donna Hylton. Donna is a community health advocate for the Coming Home program at the St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital in New York City. This is a program focusing on a special transition case management and support program for people who have been incarcerating and are returning to their community. She is also an active member of the Coalition for Women Prisoners and is an advocate with steps to end family violence. Next to Donna is Dr. Aldrie Henry Lee, who traveled from Jamaica just to be with us tonight. Thank you, Aldrie. Dr. Henry Lee is a senior research fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. She also served as associate dean of the university from 2007 to 2015. She is also the chair of the annual Caribbean Child Research Conference. Aldrie is a sociologist by training, and she has conducted research and published in the areas of social protection, child rights, and poverty in the Caribbean. More importantly for us tonight, Aldrie is also the author of a study on women in prison, the impact of incarceration on women, their children, and families, which she completed in 2005. So we will start our conversation with Aldrie. The title of our panel is Women in Jamaican Prison, Local and Global Implications. You have looked at women imprisonment in Jamaica, and on a regular basis, you undertake research looking at various issues in Jamaican society. When we talk about women in prison in Jamaica, what are the issues behind the term that we're really trying to address?
Well, hello. Yes. Good evening, everyone. Before I answer her question, I want to thank the persons who conceptualized the panel and those who organized it, because it's always a pleasure to leave Jamaica and come and speak to intellectuals outside of Jamaica. When we speak about women in prison in Jamaica, we think of an injustice, a lot of injustice in terms of the way they are sentenced. One of the women told me that the judge asked her, how many children do you have? And she said 6, and therefore she got 6 years. In terms of the men and women relationships, most of the times the women have not had the enjoyment of a father in their house when they were growing up, and they were also lured into criminology or criminal activity by men. They appear in the justice system in front of a male judge. Most times they go to a prison where men run the prison. And so whenever we look at the association and what happens with women in prison in Jamaica, we have to think of a situation where in the end, it's always the women who suffer the most, more than men. But I do have a presentation, so I don't know if you...
Yes, of course. Please do walk us through your presentation.
Yes, so, PowerPoint, please. Okay, I begin the presentation by quoting a very good quote, I thought. It said something that talks about women everywhere. All around the world, women prisoners are a neglected group. There are always small numbers of them, usually 5% of the prison population. That is 1 in 20 of all prisoners. They are an afterthought in systems run for men by men. And I thought that was very important to highlight this quote because it shows us the gender situation and the fact that women indeed are afterthought in the system. The aim of the study that we did was to examine the quality of life of female inmates in Jamaica and to examine the impact of the incarceration of mothers on their children. The methodology was both, let me give you a Jamaican context. Jamaica is a very poor developing country. The per capita income is $7,000 US, and if you compare to what the per capita for the US, you will see that we are already far behind. We have a population of 2.8 million. Homicide rate is 36 per 100,000, and our economic growth, as you would see, for the average 13 years has been less than 1%. So it's a country that is highly indebted. I didn't put the figure there, but 65% of our budget goes towards paying our debt. So we are highly indebted. Currently, we have the IMF program in place, and we are trying to get ourselves settled and get some economic growth in place. I won't read everything because I know I have a timer there that has already warned me. We use a methodology that was both quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative involved face-to-face interviews with women and children, and also the qualitative involved speaking with them, the ex-inmates and their children, in focus groups. We also did some case studies. As you will see from the main findings, the inmates or the ex-inmates were about 33 years, a young population. Most of them were imprisoned because of drugs. They came from poor urban families. They were in Fort Augusta prison, which is the only female prison in Jamaica. I had about 60 slides, but I was told that was too much, and of course it is. But just to give you an idea of what was going on. But 86% of them were in prison because of drug charges, and the main reason that they got themselves involved in criminal activity was because of financial situation. They were all poor, trying to raise money or to get money for their family, and they were all from the lower income occupations. Their experience with the legal system was not favorable. They said that they got little legal support, and they felt that the trial process was very unfair. I gave you an example earlier where the sentencing was at the discretion of the judge, and most of the judges were unsympathetic to them and most of them reprimanded them for coming before them. And as I said, they would sentence them sometimes based on the number of children that they have. The prison conditions, very deplorable, overcrowding, bad food, bad clothing, little counseling. Many of them did not get counseling, lack of privacy. generally slow response to their problem. So if you had a problem and you mentioned it to the person in charge, there was a very slow response. Those who were imprisoned in the UK, who I spoke with, or who had come back, said that the prisons were better. They got a little better rehabilitation. They were given some skills. They learned some skills, etc. Impact on the inmates themselves. There were high levels of depression. They were anxious about their children. Most of them who had kids were very anxious about what was happening to them. They were very resentful, because they said that they didn't think they got a fair chance to be listened to in the courthouse. They didn't think that it was fair that the person who had encouraged them to come into the drug activity was off free, and they were inside, and they were very angry. The impact on their children was not positive, as you could imagine. There was a lot of emotional impact. They were not happy. They were sad. A lot of them cried. Their schoolwork deteriorated. They were very embarrassed. And if they knew of the whereabouts of their mothers, they kept it as a secret, because they did not want to tell people. Those who did not know, many times the mothers did not tell their children where they were, so they would think that their mother had gone away to work. So those who didn't know were in a better position emotionally, but those who knew tried to keep their mother's whereabouts as a secret. The reason I put the denomination there, because I got a case where a child said that when they went to church, the pastor spent the sermon talking about the evils of crime and looking directly at the family. So they actually felt that they were not welcome in the church anymore, and one of them attempted suicide. So not very positive. Life after prison, as you can well imagine, was not pleasant. There was little rehabilitation. They hadn't been given enough opportunity to learn skills. An accountant said to me, for example, that she now had to sell back juice on the road because nobody would employ her as an accountant. She went into drugs to try and save her family because she wasn't getting any job. She had just graduated. But the opportunity to get work after imprisonment is very difficult. Those in the UK did say that they received better training, and they also got a little more advice on how to deal with life after prison, but it was still not enough, because when you came back to Jamaica, the society, as you can well imagine, was not welcoming, and even their own community members and family were not interested in having them around in many cases. So they were rejected by friends, and there were some cases of depression. Okay, so advice to inmates, I just wanted to put this in. This is a person who is a former probation officer who was speaking to inmates at the time, and it, to me, captures some of what happened. She said, a woman in an institution gets so much more punishment than a man. A woman finds it so much harder to pick up her love life when she goes home. You might not know it, this because you have not yet been released. You are here to learn what society thinks of you, or things you need to learn. But I want to admonish you today, I want to encourage you that you also need to learn to get along with your loved ones, to reach out to them while you are right here. The point is, when you are ostracized from your family in prison, when you go back, it's very difficult to pick up where you left off. One of the things that we noticed, that those who did not tell the children where they were, when they came back, they found that the children didn't even really want them in their lives. So somehow it's difficult, but the better way to go is to actually let the children know where you are and try to meet the children or to have some conversation with them through visits. Visits are not encouraged for children. The officials would only allow adults over 18 and over, but you can ask for a special request if you want. But it's very difficult for those, especially those who are incarcerated abroad, to keep contact with their parents, their mothers, because, of course, the phone calls are not very frequent, etc., etc. All right, so I know my boss will soon show the time. I just wanted to put up some themes. Intergenerational poverty is one of the themes that came out. Oh, not bad. I'm doing well. Intergenerational poverty, which shows throughout the study, which I found, that the prisoners were from poor urban families, Their children were, as you would see, as you have seen, been impacted negatively, and there's all indication that they too will become poor and they'll remain in poverty, and one never knows how they will turn out in the end if they themselves will not be inmates. The male-female power relations that I spoke about, most of the time is because of this lack of support from the men that the women are encouraged to go and look somewhere else. They can't get a job, and they get somebody in the community who says, man, just one trip, and I can give you 5,000 US. Why does it take one trip? So-and-so went, and she come back, and so-and-so. Sometimes, as one of them told me, they are actually the decoy, and they set them up that the police will be focusing on them rather than the others, and that is what happens many times. But it's obvious a man is not there in the house to support them. A man encourages them to come into criminal activity. They come before the judge who is ready to sentence them as soon as, how many children do you have? Okay, 6, then that's it. And then they come out and they find themselves unable to support themselves. Fort Augusta, those who know about the total institution theory and framework, that study showed very clearly that Fort Augusta had become a total institution where the guards themselves were more interested in the institutions than the human beings. But I won't spend too much time. I don't want my time to go. Poor state support. The society's uncaring nature. It is very, very difficult when you come from prison to expect any kind of love and support as you come out. Most people, when you go to get a job and you say, do you have any criminal record? Once you say yes, it's very difficult. So a few of them I spoke to who were helpers said they did not say. They went as domestic helpers and housekeepers. And if somebody asked them, do you have a criminal record? They say no, because that would be the only way that they would get a job. So, and in fact, interestingly, the state itself does not employ ex-inmates. So if you want to work in the public sector in Jamaica and you have a criminal record, they will not employ you. So one of the recommendations I had said was that the state had to send a signal to people by employing ex-inmates so that they would know that nothing is wrong with employing ex-inmates. The children, I say, are caught in the middle, as we had seen. I put a picture of the new government, as I was speaking to my colleagues yesterday, that we have a new government in place. The guy at the extreme, it'll be your right, is the minister. He's by the lady with the pink jacket. He's a minister, the new minister of national security. So we will see what happens, what he decides to do with the prison situation with the UK. I won't have much time to talk about it. But so my recommendations have to do with improving the justice system, finding alternative methods to punish, inverted commas, criminal activity, improve the prison conditions, widen the skills that they learn in prison. I have seen some of the recommendations that we made in 2005. There is a wider range of skills that they learn. Support for children whose mothers are imprisoned. Definitely we need a large pool of social workers, counselors to go to these children and see what is happening to them. Rehabilitation comes up. What kind of rehabilitation? Reintegration. How do you learn? You have to learn to live outside of prison. A lot of them say sometimes they feel safer and happier in prison because wherever you go outside of the society, it seems as if your prison life follows you. And issues of restorative justice come up, and we have to think of ways of using more restorative justice to deal with the female prisoners. My time is up, so I thank you very much, and I hope I have been of some. Thank you.
Thank you, Aldrie, and thank you for staying within the allocated time. But I can't resist telling our audience about the UK prison situation that you just mentioned. The British government very generously offered to build a new prison in Jamaica to help deal with the issue of overcrowding, except that they will send Jamaican prisoners who are in UK prisons to that prison. So it's And it's been quite controversial from what I understand.
Right.
And so, but it's not clear yet whether...
It's not clear.
they're
The
going to
last
go
government was in negotiation with the UK government for this new prison. And seemed to be happy about having the prison, the last government, but then they got a lot of public outcry because people said, why would you want all the prisoners to come back? They committed the crime in the UK. Why do we have to take responsibility for them? What happens? We already have an overcrowding problem. What happens? Do they coming in? You make a new prison, but it will be full soon. And then what happens to them when they leave prison? So right now, this new government hasn't yet tackled it, but it's certainly going to be a very controversial issue which people will not take lightly because they don't think we need a prison. There's a lot of conversation about reparation and paying back what happened to us, etc. So that's a kind of conversation that the society wants to engage in, not a prison conversation.
Great. Thank you, Aldrie. Liz, now 11 years later, you sort of looking at the same issues, going further into the causes and consequences of women imprisonment in Jamaica. And I know you're still sort of in the middle of the study, but you were in Jamaica in January, had a chance to go to Fort Augusta. What are you finding so far? Hopefully some improvement, and hopefully the government has followed through with some of Aldrie's recommendation in 2005, right?
Sure. So thank you very much, Marie-Claude. I think if it's okay, maybe I'll bracket that question for just a moment and take a step back and talk a little bit about the context in which we're doing this study together.
Sure.
And then I'll get into a little bit, I wouldn't maybe call them findings yet, but preliminary observations. So I'd also just like to echo Aldrie's thanks to the Sackler Foundation, to the Brooklyn Museum, for hosting us here, inviting us to speak with you all. I'm also so honored to be on this panel with my inspiring fellow panelists, and to have the opportunity to collaborate on this project with the Vance Center with the University of the West Indies that we'll tell you about in a few moments. And thank you to all of you for joining us here tonight. So as Marie-Claude was saying, I direct a Center for Women in Justice at Cornell Law School that works on global issues of gender justice and violence against women. I also teach a law school clinic that similarly works on cases and projects that address gender violence and discrimination. And so I come at these issues from kind of a global perspective. And I think, Aldrie mentioned that women tend to be really across the world a very small percentage of prisoners. I think national averages around 5%, range from 2% to maybe 10%. And maybe as a result of that and other things, for many years, international and domestic laws and standards that govern prisons and prison policies have really not paid attention to women at all. They've been crafted with men in mind. And the result of that is that they haven't taken into account the particular needs and circumstances of women prisoners. This all began to change in 2010 when the United Nations adopted for the first time a set of international standards that actually do address the situation of women offenders and prisoners, known as the Bangkok Rules. The full name's the Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Female Prisoners and Non-Custodial Measures for Women Offenders, but the Bangkok Rules. The Bangkok Rules recognize that the principle of non-discrimination that's really embedded in international human rights law in all ways requires states to address the unique challenges that women face and to take into account their particular needs when they come into contact with the criminal justice system and then, in some cases, end up in prison. So what this might mean is, for example, making sure that women prisoners are provided with gender-specific health care and that their needs are met. That they're allowed to remain and that their ability to remain in contact with their families is facilitated and encouraged. It also means that states have an obligation to address the root causes of women's incarceration, whether it involves poverty, drug and alcohol addiction, gender-based violence. The Bangkok Rules also talk about states' obligations to provide women prisoners and former women prisoners with programs and services that facilitate their reintegration and rehabilitation so that they can rebuild their lives after coming out of prison. So we actually now do have a pretty robust set of international standards that protect women offenders and prisoners, but unfortunately most countries haven't adequately implemented them. Also, a lot more is needed to really begin to understand what are the causes, the pathways that lead women to prison. For most women, I don't think it's one pathway. I think it's multiple causes, multiple pathways, but how do we begin to understand them? And how do we begin to understand the consequences of that imprisonment for women and for families and for communities? Because the incarceration of a woman doesn't just impact that woman herself. So we have, with the Vance Center and the University of the West Indies and several other partners, have undertaken a study that really tries to respond to addressing these issues. The Bangkok rules actually themselves call for research into the characteristics, the causes, the consequences of women's imprisonment, recognizing that having this kind of human rights-based research is really critical to understanding what the gaps and challenges are, what the solutions are to addressing some of these issues. And so we've undertaken this study that really seeks, as Marie-Claude was saying, to build upon Dr. Henry Lee's important 2005 study that we've just heard about. And its purpose is really to contribute to an understanding of the causes and the consequences of women's imprisonment today in Jamaica, 10, 11 years on. So again, before I delve into a little bit what the study's about and what our preliminary observations are, I wanted to talk a little bit more comparatively, because I guess for me and for the Avon Global Center, this study is really the continuation of 6 years of work around issues of women in prisons. And this began really, in 2010, 2011, when we published a report on barriers to justice for survivors of domestic violence here in New York State who became defendants for reasons that related to the abuse that they'd experienced. And it was really through the experience of working on that report that I began to understand some of the ways in which the law and legal systems that are supposed to protect individuals often fail to take into account the needs and experiences of women offenders. In 2013, we published another report together with the University of Chicago Law School's Human Rights Clinic and the Public Defender's Office in Argentina, looking at the causes, conditions, and consequences of women's imprisonment in Argentina. We conducted a survey with about 30% of women prisoners in Argentina's federal prison system, as well as conducting qualitative interviews with prisoners and other stakeholders. And really from that, we were able to begin to understand some of the issues facing women who are deprived of liberty. And so one of our findings from that study was that about 56% of women in Argentina's federal prisons were incarcerated for drug trafficking-related offenses. So actually, a slightly lower percentage than the one that in Dr. Henry Lee's study, but yet a very high rate. And we suggested that these high rates can be traced to the response of many Latin American countries to the U.S.'s war on drugs policy that began in the 1970s, the so-called war on drugs policy. Which really encouraged a harsh approach to drug trafficking that resulted in a harsh law enforcement approach that tended to target low-level offenders because these were the low-hanging fruit, much easier to catch than drug kingpins that were really facilitating the whole endeavor. And then along with this came harsh sentences for all types of drug offenses, including low-level offenses. And so as you might imagine, this had a disproportionate impact on women, who were the ones who tended to be those low-level drug offenders, who tended to be the drug mules, who got into these activities often as a result of dire economic circumstances, the need to take care of their families. And so we argued, thinking about these factors, that the Argentina government should really consider using alternatives to incarceration in situations like this. Our report also looked at several other areas for reform, and we also highlighted some of the really positive things that were happening in Argentina in terms of the government beginning to take into account some of the particular needs of women prisoners, such as house arrest for primary caretakers and provisions for facilitating contact between imprisoned women and their children. One actually exciting outcome, I think, of this report was that judges in New York and elsewhere in the United States, a little while later, who were members of the National Association of Women Judges, Women in Prisons Committee, ended up citing the report and Argentina's policies in a letter that they prepared and submitted to the U.S. government, in which they urged the government to change a decision that had been taken to transfer all of the women prisoners in Danbury Prison up in Connecticut to another prison 1,000 miles away. far away from their families, far away from their children. And so, their efforts in opposing this policy were ultimately, for the most part, successful. And I think this is an example of how Argentina's practices were able to play a really positive supporting role back here in the United States. And so I'm very hopeful that our Jamaica study will generate some similar cross-border insights and exchanges in a positive way. So the Jamaica project. So at the launch event for our Argentina report, we were really excited to have the opportunity to meet Marie-Claude and to learn about some of the work of the Vance Center. That interaction led to this exciting collaboration that we're talking about tonight. And where as I said, we're looking at the causes and consequences of women's imprisonment in Jamaica today. And so why Jamaica? As a Caribbean nation, Jamaica is located in a region that's really a major transit site for drug trafficking into the US and Western Europe. So some of those same issues of anti-drug policies and the drug trade that we saw in Argentina may very well be issues in Jamaica as well. Human trafficking is a serious problem in the Caribbean, and women who commit drug offenses may be caught up in that too. Research from countries really around the world have continually highlighted links between violence that women have experienced pre-incarceration and their resulting incarceration. And so we're interested in understanding whether the experiences of incarcerated women in Jamaica corroborate some of these trends, or whether they provide a different perspective. At the same time, in contrast to many other countries in the region and the world, the numbers of women in prison in Jamaica have actually declined in the last couple of years. And so we really hope to learn what the reasons are for this change, and how to build upon them. And I think we're so fortunate to have the opportunity to work with Dr. Henry Lee, to benefit from her expertise and her experience, and to build upon this important 2005 study, which really focused on the impacts of incarceration on women and families. And so our study is looking at whether and how things have changed since the publication of her report. So in terms of findings, so again, I think it's premature to talk about findings, but in terms of some preliminary observations, we had the opportunity to travel to Jamaica in January and met with stakeholders, conducted interviews with stakeholders ranging from judges to the Department of Corrections to the public prosecutor to NGOs, so began to gather some insights on some of these issues. We're planning to conduct a standardized survey of all eligible women prisoners in Fort Augusta, as well as qualitative interviews of about 10 women prisoners and others. And we're just waiting for final permission through the ethics review process with the IRB affiliated with the prison system and with Cornell before commencing with that aspect of the research. But in terms of preliminary findings, I think some of the observations we've made and others have shared with us is that poverty certainly is one of the root causes of women's imprisonment. It's linked to higher rates of incarceration in several related ways. One of them is the absence of parental supervision and love and care throughout children's upbringing, which Aldrie referred to. Another issue is unemployment and underemployment. Women in Jamaica are actually receiving higher levels of education than men, and yet suffer higher rates of unemployment, 8% higher than men, and have less access to quality jobs. And so one of our interviewees commented that there's really a disincentive for them to invest in schooling, and this can lead them to fall into poverty or engage in unlawful activities. About 45% of Jamaican households are headed by a woman, and the need to be a sole caretaker and breadwinner contributes to unrelenting economic pressure that in some cases may lead women to engage in criminal activities, particularly economic crimes. We're interested in learning more about women's involvement in drug trafficking and patterns of sentencing women offenders, especially for drug-related crimes. We suspect that we might see some of the same patterns that we saw in Argentina with low-level offenders being sentenced to long prison sentences. In Dr. Henry Lee's study, less than half of the women interviewed believed that the judge had given them a fair sentence. And so, as she noted in her report, more research certainly needs to be done on sentencing patterns. We also have heard a lot about violence and gang cultures in some parts of Jamaican society, so we're interested in learning more about women's role in that culture, both as perpetrators and in some cases as protecting male perpetrators in ways that may result in their own imprisonment. Gender-based violence, is a common pathway to imprisonment for many women. It's something we heard from many of the women and individuals we interviewed, that violence against women was common in Jamaica, and that despite protective laws, law enforcement often doesn't enforce those laws very robustly, and that many cases don't end up being prosecuted. We also heard that in practice, the Jamaican justice system is disinclined to really take into account women's experiences of abuse when considering claims of self-defense or considering terms of sentences. Other justice system factors, a lack of legal aid, lengthy pretrial detention, insufficient exploration of alternatives to incarceration are other factors that we're looking at. And then, we also want to learn more about the steps that Jamaica has taken over the past decade to address the issues that Dr. Henry Lee's study explored regarding, has the government developed and implemented effective programs to facilitate women's rehabilitation and reintegration and the endurance of their family relationships? Are there good practices that might offer examples for other countries? And so, as you can see, I think this brief rush through some of our observations, this project is really at the beginning stages, but we're really excited about the possibilities that it offers. We hope that ultimately the study's results and recommendations will be able to assist the government and assist community members and civil society in developing policies and practices to address the needs of women offenders and prisoners and their families. We also hope that the study will inform the international community and contribute to a greater understanding of women's incarceration worldwide. And so I just want to close by coming back to a reflection on my early experience in New York. When I started working on these issues here in New York State, one of the former women prisoners that we were working with told me why, for her, she felt that the research we were doing on the causes of incarceration for survivor defendants in New York State was actually valuable, was worth doing it all. And she said, for the first time, I'm understanding and seeing and hearing others say that I'm not just a victim, I'm not just a defendant, I'm not just a former prisoner, I'm a human being with rights. And I think that, her statement really stayed with me, and I think that this recognition that women prisoners and offenders are unique, they're socially embedded individuals with complex histories and families and relationships, that they're human beings with human rights, is something that really lies at the heart of the Bangkok rules that I mentioned at the beginning, and I think of our goals for this project. So thank you all.
Thank you, Liz. Now, turning to Donna, we heard a lot about Jamaica, and the title of our panel is also about local and global implication. So I'm really curious to hear whether you've noticed from Aldrie and Liz's presentation any parallels with what you've experienced in the U.S., work on reintegration and even life in prison itself. And really what could be the implications of what we're seeing in Jamaica for the U.S. as well.
First, I would like to say thank you all for coming, and hope you get something out of it as I am tonight. I wanted to rewind just a little bit. When Marie-Claude introduced me, another piece of my bio was that I spent 27 years in prison. And so that's why I'm on this stage tonight, and I'm a whole lot of other places and many other nights and days, because I speak to those issues and the issues of women and what happens to us, all right? So everything that was said here by Liz, by Aldrie, mirror almost to a T the situations that happen with women in this country. So my experience and my own personal experience, and from my experience of being around other women, while incarcerated, something that just came to me tonight was that when we were having a discussion before we started, we were talking about how everything has become criminalized in this country. Every single thing that a black and or brown person does in this country has become criminalized. And one thing that I just got from what you just said, Liz, is that poverty has become criminalized. It is a crime to be poor. And based on that alone, no matter what and who you are susceptible to the criminal justice system in some form or fashion. And it was like an aha moment, because the majority of people are not only black and brown in prison, they are poor. We are poor. And the greatest thing in that, and I think what the common denominator here, in Jamaica and any other countries that criminalize people based on poverty, right, is that we don't have the opportunity, we don't have the means, the resources to get the proper defenses and to have the proper defenses for us. A lot of women are in prisons, especially in this state, for protecting themselves. And we're working on something like that now. We were working on the DVSJA bill, which we call the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, for that reason. A woman has been traumatized. Majority of women in prison, we have a study that says maybe 85% of women in prison have been victims, and I hate that word, but for a better word right now, right? Of some form of abuse throughout their lives. I know for a fact that it's more than that. I lived it, I was there, and I know that there are women to this day that do not speak to the abuse that happened to them and continue to happen to them while they're in the prison system. There's a lawsuit out now where 5 women who I know, and they're Jane Doe to you, but they're alive and they're human to me, you know, and their stories are relevant and valid, who have been subjected to abuse within the system recently and continue to be subjected to abuse and basically torture. It becomes torturous when your cries are not listened to or not heard, and power, use of power, you know, the abuse of power is used against you daily, you know? And so that's going on now. So the pattern that I see is that poverty, the greatest common denominator, and it is just criminalized. And the majority are black and brown, right, who are impoverished. And we do have some white people and Asian people who also fall in that category. But the majority of people we know, and for women, I must say that within the last 40 years, to tie into that, within the last 40 years, the majority of women in prison has increased at an enormous rate. It is now almost 700% that the population of women that are incarcerated has become more than the male population. You understand what I'm saying? Like, women are the fastest growing incarcerated population within this country. And this is daily. And, you know, sometimes when I watch what's going on, what's around me, you know, the social things that are going on with Black Lives Matter, and, you know, we have this other movement called Say Her Name. Because what we don't really hear, and we don't really see in the media, is that women are getting killed at an enormous rate also, and beaten really severely, and die while they're in jails. They never even make it through the court system, right? They're being killed in these jails. They're being killed in police cars. They're being killed in police vans. They're being killed because they're being beaten to death, or beaten to a thread. And they're hanging on by a thread, and so die while in the cell or in a car or wherever. And these stories are not being told, but we know these stories because we're in the trenches of this, right? And it saddens me, and it saddens those of us that have lived this and continue to live it, because this conversation tonight is a reason for that, right? This came out of the need and trying to understand what's wrong, what's going on, why are we doing this as a people to other human beings, you know? And we focus on women. Women are the most vulnerable. I'd hate to say it, but it's true, the most vulnerable for so many reasons, and that vulnerability is preyed upon. And it is criminalized also. The vulnerability of a woman is criminalized. I mean, from a child, a woman is told, you know, or led to believe that she should fit a certain stereotype or just only able to do certain things. You know, I know there was a judge, to go to your, to back on to what you said, that a judge gave a woman 6 years because she had 6 children. There was a judge, and he happened to be one of my judges, that said, do you see a tree outside the window? And no, there wasn't a tree. And he said, well, by the time you come home, there will be a tree. And we know how long it takes for a tree to become a full-grown tree, right? Not a sapling, a tree. So that in itself said something. And the behavior in court, when a woman goes into the court system, the behavior in court is just so horrible, and you become so dehumanized and so demoralized, and you just feel so unworthy. You don't know what else to do. I think I was saying it earlier in our conversation that when our male counterpart is arrested and goes through the court system, immediately, right after the handcuffs are taken off and they're brought in front of the court, plea bargains are spoken about. Plea bargains are presented to our male counterparts. It does not happen for women. I spent 27 years in the maximum security prison in this state, and not one woman could say that at arraignment, a plea bargain or anything like that was offered to her, or she even understood what it was until later on when it was too late, myself included. And that's one of the reasons that pushed me to be part of this work, and to be an activist and an advocate, and to speak up and to be a voice for women that are not here, and to be a voice for women that still find it difficult to speak to the abuse, to speak to, the marginalization and the dehumanization and all those ills that we have rampant in society. I hope I answered your question. It's just that I had an aha moment, and it just got to me because I'm very passionate about it, because I live it. I continue to live it every day. I've just been home 4 years, and I've been out here doing the work so strongly, and just so, because it's so important. And I wish more people would get involved. And I would like to say also, sadly, that when I'm in a room and an event, when it focuses on women, the room is not full, just like the visiting room in a women's prison is not full. But when I go to an event, whether I'm the speaker or one of the speakers or just in the audience as a participant, it's very full. Why is that? I still don't get that. And I have my good friend over there, Jasenia, shaking your head. And I have to say that. I have to be very real when because why do we gravitate to the men? Why do we gravitate to our men like that? We don't gravitate to our women. We don't force, we don't embrace women. We don't love them. We don't nurture them. We don't do anything for them. We just treat women like we are pariah, like we're not worthy. Why do we do that? We're just as important. We're just as valid. We are the caretakers, the caregivers. We are the nurturers. We are we are the ties that bind, that hold the families together. When a woman is incarcerated, you incarcerate and you tear up the entire family. You tear up the entire family. A child is ripped from the mother. Granted, the mother has done something that she needs to be punished for, but not tortured for. And neither does the family should not go through that either. A child is ripped from that mother and put into the system, and the child is susceptible to being adopted, and the mother knows nothing about it, doesn't know where the child is, where the child ends up, has no communication. We've worked on that now with ASFA, and we've been able to stop that, but it does happen. Just like we're working on shackling, anti-shackling, for shackling a pregnant woman. Why would you shackle a pregnant woman and handcuff her to a bed and her legs chained to a bed when she's in labor? It happens. And we're working so diligently on that to stop that, because it just seems to be very oxymoronic to sentence someone to punish someone for a crime, but then you commit further crimes, inhumane crimes against that person for sometimes a whole lifetime. Something is just off with that. And so that's why I try to, bring light to those things. So I do hope I answered the question, even though I veered off a little bit, but I had to. I really had to. And how much time do I have? Could you show, I think the 5-minute clip? It gives you a little bit more why I do what I do, I think.
When it came time for me to get out of prison, I'll never forget how I felt, because I couldn't grasp what it was like being in another century. It's like 3 decades later almost. My name is Donna Hylton. I'm formerly known as inmate 86G0206. I was sentenced to 25 years to life for the crimes of kidnapping and murder. I was only 19 years old, struggling. I met one of my soon-to-be co-defendants. She gave me an option to earn some money, and when I realized what was going on, it was too late. A gun was pulled on me, it was in my face, telling me that I had to do whatever they told me to do, And if I didn't, my daughter's life was in jeopardy. And we got arrested. The case became such just big media frenzy. It was labeled the crime of the century. It was the most heinous thing in like 100 years. I was labeled the leader of this girl gang and portrayed in the media as the person basically that put this scheme, this crime, this kidnapping and murder plan together, which was not the case. Can you imagine being in a cinder block 6x10, cold, dark, dank room in this little window and people just looking in at you? You don't really understand what it can do to your psyche. People don't know that 85% of women are victims of abuse, have been traumatized at some point in their lives, and are in prison because of that. I was like, what did you always want to do when you leave? And I knew that I wanted to walk out of prison. I wanted to walk out of a door that had an exit sign that actually let me walk out of it, that wasn't chained up or locked up. And I did that. So I walked out of prison. I walked out the exit doors. And I got on my knees. And I just took it in. And I just said, thank you. I was free enough to walk out of prison, and nothing could hold me back from that. Now, a year later, after I've been out, I had to write the superintendent for permission to go back in to see the people that I became friends with. Not just friends, but just family with, because it's my family and I missed them. And then I got the response, and I was so happy when I opened that envelope and I saw that I was approved. And it just hit me like, I can go see them. I can touch them again. I can just hear their voices again up close and just be with them, even if it was just for a minute. Because they mean so much to me.
Going home.
And I just wanted them to know it's okay. Everything is going to be okay. One of the most important people I met on my journey was Eve Ensler. And Eve Ensler allowed me, along with a few other women, to tell our stories, to show the world that we made some horrible choices, made some tragic choices, but we weren't and we're not those choices. We wanted to show the stories of women and what happens to women and what leads up to those mistakes and those tragic choices that we make. And I tell those stories today. I tell my story, and I tell the stories of those women that are not out here to tell those stories. So it could humanize us, so you can see that we have a right to speak up. We have a right to have a voice, that we're human.
School building, that's the building where I work, go to school, with a building next to it. I worked, disciplinary, and housing units. Oh my gosh. There's a tower. Wow.
So how do you feel, Donna?
Excited. And nervous.
I hope that sheds a little bit more and gives it a little bit more.
It does. That was very powerful. Thank you, Donna. I forgot to mention that Donna was actually born in Jamaica, so you can see how we are coming full.
All right. All right.
How we are coming full circle here, and I had asked Donna earlier, but I think it would be interesting to talk about it here with our audience of what in your experience, your own personal experience, but also working with people transitioning back from prison. Do you think that immigrants or foreign-born prisoners have a more difficult experience in prison, or is it the same?
Right, to our conversation earlier, I explained to Marie-Claude that it's very similar. we actually mirror each other, you know, whether you're born in this country and you go to prison in this country, you're born in another country and you come to this country. I think the only thing that I was able to find any kind of, I don't know, separation, was in the distance itself. The distance, you're already distant when you're in prison. The bars, the gates, everything, you know, you're separated. So separation, you really can't feel a distance to separation. Separation is separation. But when you come from another country, the root of you, your root is in another country. And so it's difficult to pick up a phone and to make a call and to say, you know, to just talk to someone, or even to ask for a visit, and you might get a visit within the week or within the month or even some months. When you come from another country, you come from Jamaica, it might never happen, or it might take years, because poverty, because distance, because time, because so many factors that you know, layered upon layer and upon layer. So I think that's really, sadly, but I think also it's okay, you know, that's the only kind of difference. Yes. But I feel strongly about it, and I feel sad about the whole entire thing, that, like I said, the separation in itself, and, you know, it's just torturous.
Sure, thank you. And to that same issue, I was just reviewing a report from the New York State Department of Correctional Services talking about how the numbers of foreign-born prisoners in New York State prison had decreased, but due in part to the higher rate of deportation. Mm-hmm. And Jamaican born prisoners are the second highest prison population after Dominican Republic. Yes. And this question is for Aldrie. In your research, have you come across those prisoners who have been sent back to Jamaica from the United States, and what's their experience?
Well, they too have a very difficult experience. And as I was saying to you earlier in a conversation, your video made me a little emotional. So just bring me back to the study and speaking to persons who have experienced prison life. But the deportees have a very difficult time, because sometimes they come back to Jamaica, they have no family, because if you left at 2 and you go to the US and you commit a crime at 30, you come back home, who do you have? Most of your family don't even remember you. And as I was saying earlier on, if you call and tell Auntie May that you want to come, and she say, where were you all this time? And you say you were in prison, Auntie May don't really want you by her door, because Auntie May is struggling with her own life, and to have to deal with you and to tell her neighbors where you were and where you were coming from. So the stigma, the embarrassment of having a family member in prison makes it very, very difficult for the deportees. And what we have found is many of them go back to criminal activity, because they get somebody who comes to meet them at the airport and say, well, you know, I just have a job there to do, you know, so come and do it for me quickly. So they tend to go back, even if they don't want to, but that's the only group who would welcome them, so that many of them find themselves back in the criminal activity.
Thank you. Now to Liz, it seems to me that one underlying theme of our conversation tonight was really in a way highlighting the local and global implication of what may be seen as a very limited local study, what Aldrie did and what you're doing now. But we're seeing how Donna mentioned how the experiences of women prisoners in New York or in the United States is very similar. And we talked about sort of how women get to prison. And I'll borrow a phrase from Donna, who told me earlier that women get to prison, it's not an action, you know, call it a crime or whatever, it's situations that get women into prison. Mm-hmm. And we mentioned poverty, and we mentioned inequality, etc. Now you come at this from sort of a global perspective, you're looking at other countries. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the similarities and sort of the, you know, really the pathways, if we can say it that way, to prison? And do you really see that in Jamaica, in the US, in Argentina, and other countries, that really states have understood that and are trying to address that instead of, you know, over-criminalizing and other issues?
Yeah, that's a good and complicated question. So yes, I think the global similarities far outweigh any differences. I think, when you think about pathways, the, intersections of poverty and race and discrimination and gender violence, different types of abuse and victimization, marginalization, all of these violence, all of these factors, often are part and parcel of the different pathways that result in women's incarceration. And I think, we see this across, all different countries. We did some work, desk research on a comparative analysis of causes and consequences of women's imprisonment, working with the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, and really saw, tremendous similarities in these issues. That said, though, I think that to really understand, I think there's a need to go local, because there are differences in solutions and contexts and situations. So to really understand what the commonalities are and what the solutions are, I think there's a real need to both think globally, but also to look locally too. And so I think some studies that are like the ones that we're engaged in are a part of that. Do countries take this into account? No, I don't think so. I think the Bangkok rules are a first step. I think they're kind of these international standards that are trying to draw these connections, that are trying to call attention to the multidimensional nature of the situations that lead to women's incarceration. But I don't think that that's yet translated into policy and practice at the national level. I think there's a lot more work to be done.
Okay. We do have 15 minutes for questions. If you have questions, you can make your way through one of the mics. We have one on each side. Please do say if you're addressing your question to one particular panelist or to the entire panel. Please do, we encourage you to ask questions and to actual questions and to keep them brief. Thank you.
Hi, I always ask the first question in hopes to break the ice. So this question is for Donna, and one of the questions I've had is the effect of the 1996 Act that requires that women in prison basically lose custody of their children to the foster care system, and then after 1 year they're susceptible to being adopted. Can you talk more about that?
Well, you're right. That was the bill from 1996, and we basically tackled that. We argued against it because we felt like that was cruel and inhumane, and it was unjust in its design, the thought of it. Like I said, we've criminalized so many things, so we criminalize our entire family then, right? That bill allows an entire family to be criminalized and a child to be ripped apart from whatever remaining family members there, even from the possibility of having any connection, any kind of continuous bond with the mother. And so I saw the effects personally inside, what it was doing to women. Some women, and still now because of it, don't know where their child or their children are. Can you imagine? Yeah, it is just unfathomable. It just makes no sense. So those were one of the things that we tackled, and we were able to get ASPA, where the child won't be taken from the mother, right? But sad to say, as with everything that we counter, it's not adhered to. We have to, again, present it to legislature and to say, this is not being followed. This is still happening, just like the shackling of pregnant women. That was passed and put into law too. And I personally witnessed women being shackled on their way out of the building that holds the women that are pregnant and the children, right? We call it the nursery, into a van to be taken to a hospital. And you can you imagine if you're any months pregnant, a heavy metal chain and a box, black box that is just unimaginable. And you're tied, you're like this, you cannot, you're restricted, you're constricted, you're so many things. And I watched one woman like trip because she also had the leg chains on. You can hear me, right? The leg chains on, and I went to get her, and it came at a cost. But I'd rather the cost be against me than be against her losing her child. It just makes no sense. So we had to address those things, because that in itself, you cannot say that you have a system, this criminal justice system to rehabilitate for someone to go in and to become better and to become better members or productive members of society, and you're torturing people. You're literally killing people. You're abusing people. You're doing so many things, and not just to the person that you incarcerate, but to everyone around the person, right? It affects everyone. It really does affect everyone. So we're still, to your question, the law was passed that no, it should no longer be. A woman can have connection with her child and not taken from her regardless of what. I think it's up to about 5 years, give or take 5 years. And give it that much, but still, we're giving a lot of time to people, right? Especially women in prison. We're doing the best that we can. We need more help. We need voices like you. We need people at the table. We need people to reach out to the legislature, to call Albany, and to say, hey, this is wrong. We don't believe in this. This isn't right. This should not be happening. We don't want this. The law should be where, and just, we need you.
They haven't told them that they lose custody, but most of the times they lose contact with the children. But I don't think there's any law that sends them to state care. We haven't had that law.
Because there's nowhere to put them in Jamaica. Let's be real about it. Jamaica's very poor.
Usually their family takes care of them, but there's no law that says they have to be deprived of their children.
Yes, there was a question.
First, I just want to say greetings and thank you so much for doing this. And I'm so glad my friend Liz forced me to come here this evening.
Wow, thank you, Liz.
I am so happy. And to everyone in this room, don't you feel special that we're here getting this? Where is everybody, like you say, Donna? But it's okay. I'm here to help. And all of us here, we're here to help. That's why we're here on this very wintry spring evening. My name is Sharon Gordon, and I have an organization called the Coalition to Preserve Reggae Music. And we do a lot of work around, we say the music, it ain't just music, it's life, right? So we have an internet broadcast platform, and I'm offering you the opportunity to use us as you wish. We have 3 programs: social living, real talk, and reggae calling. You can use us to get your message out, whatever. Okay. I'll talk to you afterwards. Audrey, thank you. One quick question. You spoke about the number that Jamaica is the 2nd largest group in prison population, correct? Was it Lynn? Who said that?
Yes.
Okay.
I mentioned that.
So, in the study that Audrey and Lynn are working on, can you tell us what's the number of foreign nationals in Jamaica who are there because of drug trafficking and that kind of thing? Do we have a number on that, and how that kind of...
I don't have an exact number, but it will be very few. The
so it's not a large
majority
number.
of women in prison in Jamaica are Jamaicans.
Okay, so the drug trafficking then is more here going, coming here?
Right. It's
I was trying to...
It's coming this way, yes. That's what happens, yes.
Interesting you're saying that. There's a story in the paper right now about a JetBlue stewardess. I don't know if you've heard the...
Yeah.
She right. So she got, when was it, yesterday morning? 70 pounds of cocaine. She left her shoes and everything and ran off the line. And she's a JetBlue stewardess. And it's the same story.
Yes.
Possibly she works for JetBlue, so hey, carry a thing and, So that's the question I wanted to know, but thank you very much for clarifying that, and thank you.
Thank you.
No, I just, yes, the story you were saying is quite what happens. You have answered the question, but they would come and say, just carry this for me and you get a 5,000. So-and-so did it before. But as I said before, sometimes they set you up, you know. And that's what happened. That's what some of the people told me, that they set you up. The real person with the big amount of drugs is going through, and you're the decoy. I'm going to just set, so they can actually set you up that way. If they have a large shipment, they look for a vulnerable female in the community and say, oh, Mary need the money. No, she have 5 kids, she have no money. I'm going to be the one, she's going to be the one the police are focusing on, while the 100 pounds of cocaine goes through by another person. So that story has been told by many of them.
Yes, please.
Hi. I wanted to thank all of you for this wonderful, important presentation. I looked at Donna, I said, I know her, I think I've met her at a conference. And then as soon as you spoke, I thought, oh, I know her from my days working at Women's Prison Association. And I think I must know you from Bedford Hills or Taconic. But in hearing everything that come up, I guess it brought to mind for me personally, having like maybe 2 life passions, working in criminal justice at 3 right now at the Brooklyn Criminal Defense at Legal Aid, and as a forensic social worker, and a lot of prison-based work during Women's Prison Association, and then prison reentry and alternative to incarceration at Fortune. So hearing all of you speak, it just brought to mind my own, I guess, journey through this, and the numbers of people right now, like teenagers who are spending 23 hours a day in the solitary confinement, literally calling collect on that 1 hour. And it's so sad. There's just so much work, and it's just so moving that people are also out there doing this. So my other passion, I would say, is Jamaica. I spent a lot of time in Jamaica, and do a lot of some work with Sharon and CPR, as well as some volunteer work in Jamaica, which started at a soup kitchen and has evolved to getting some kids to school programs. And it's just interesting watching us kind of push these kids to stay in school, but then at the end of that path, there's no jobs for them. And that's just really, so they kind of end up doing like, you know, a lot of criminal activity, and you're sort of like, no, you gotta stay in school because what, you know? But in my work there, I've met a lot of people who were deported from here, and they sort of commented, and this is really for Dr. Henry Lee, but I guess they get dropped off at Montego Bay with, I think, $40. Not so different from when you come from Bedford Hills. $40. They haven't been in the country for, like you said, 30 years.
They don't even know how to take the bus.
Yeah, take a bus. They might have like Uncle Floyd in the country, and they go and say, so many of them that I've started to work with have all like turned to substance abuse, returned to substance use, are living in a tent, walking up and down the beach, trying to sell a $2 bracelet. It's just, do you think the government, the new government, maybe more than the old one, would be open to, do you think they're gonna look at this population and be open to programs? Because I don't think in the past they really cared about that population.
It's true. I'm not too clear on what this new government, they've only been less than a month, I think, in power. But I can say to you that there is, as we have heard before, a war on crime. So the emphasis is on sending a message. And you send a message by ensuring that you give very severe sentencing, and you don't have any sympathy for people who come out of the prison system, because remember, they are the ones who are causing the problems in the first place. So the focus has always been, and I don't know if it's going to change, is let us be as severe as possible with our punishment. So rehabilitation, reintegration, halfway house. I had recommended a halfway house for ex-prisoners. That hasn't happened. The government has too many economic problems to focus on a group that is causing trouble. Remember, we a lot of debt. We are paying 65% of our income on to debt. That population is the least concern, or less of concern for any politician right now. They are more interested in the voting group who can give them back something. For example, I was saying to my colleagues earlier, the government who won said, how did they win? They won by saying to the populace, we are giving you a tax relief. Those of you who are earning 1.5 million and below, pay no tax. So each person in Jamaican dollars who is earning less than 1.5 is taking down $18,000 more each month. That was certainly a very successful strategy to win the election. So that's the kind of thinking, and I think we need more advocacy groups There is hibiscus, but it doesn't have much help, and we need other agents and other agencies to help to see the importance of dealing with a group of persons who are vulnerable.
Thanks.
Thank you. I see a question here.
Yeah, hi. I work with the Vera Institute of Justice, and we last summer led a group of criminal justice practitioners to Germany to look at a number of prisons there. And one thing that really stood out to us was the German emphasis on human dignity, no matter who was in prison. Of course, there are issues around how that goes into practice, of course, but I was struck by, I forget who mentioned human dignity in their talk, but I was struck by that. And one thing that stood out in the German system was the reason why they emphasize that is because of their history with the Holocaust, and their response was directly related to that history. And it was poignant for us as Americans to think back about our troubled history with slavery and Jim Crow and continued racism today, to think about how we have never come to terms with that history. And I know Jamaica has a very, very similar past. It's very different, but also a similar past in terms of the transatlantic slave trade and their relationship with the UK. So I was just wondering if anyone could speak to the racial and ethnic disparities that you see in the prison system in Jamaica and how that translates directly to women who are incarcerated.
Okay, in the racial, it's not going to be difficult to say that most of the Jamaicans are blacks. Those, in terms of, I'm not sure what else you want, because in terms of the focus, I think I got the first part of your question. The focus has begun to be on reparation. A lot of people know there's a reparation commission, and many of our university lecturers are advocating that the UK has to pay back, all the colonizers have to pay back for what they did. And so there is a lot of talk. They haven't been able to put a figure on how much they will pay us back, but that has not been welcome. In fact, when the UK Prime Minister came to Jamaica, the opposition was very upset because they said that he should be speaking about reparation rather than giving us a prison. So they felt the government should not have met with him until he started speaking about how he was going to pay back for all those indignities that the slaves, the ex-slaves have suffered.
Have you seen anything in your preliminary observations about race or no?
Not so specifically, although, I mean, I think I have heard from some of our interviewees that, women in prison in Jamaica are, tend to be the poorest, among the poorest groups, and, dark-skinned as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question.
As a Caribbean American woman, thank you so much for doing this. I am launching a business that is all about empowering women, especially my Caribbean culture is elegant. I'm not frumpy, I'm elegant. So I've always wanted to use proceeds from my business to support, topics like this. But this one stuck, rhyme or chord with me again because I am a Jamaican. I was now to Dr. Henry Lee. I was wondering, are there any non-for-profits in Jamaica? Being here in the States, I'm kind of a disconnect with Jamaica and I'm now wondering, are there non-for-profits? What can I, as just a citizen, just a single civilian, what can I do? What can I start? What kind of movements can I join to help with this?
Yes, well, there is that's excellent, and I thank you. There is an organization called Hibiscus, which helps to support the recently released prisoners. They need a lot of help. They try to put up training centers, training courses, counseling sessions for those who have come out. And they tell me that they are in dire need of everything. Because sometimes even the ex-prisoners need clothing, they need food. So anything is welcome. I'll speak to you afterwards about how you can help. Thanks a million.
Thank you. I think I'll give him the next question.
Thank you. Good evening. First, echo a lot of the sentiments that we heard before. Thank you for doing this. This is a great presentation. And Donna, I understand the point that it's a shame that at an event like this, focusing on women, that we see such low attendance. But the people that are here are here for a reason, and it's important. And for me, as from the male perspective, when I heard about this, what interested me, and with social media and being the age that I am, we Netflix a lot, bench. There's a show, Orange is the New Black, focusing on women incarceration and all that stuff. But even though there's a lot of things that we could talk about as the business of prison and all the mass incarceration being a symptom and all the root causes that you went over, but I didn't hear anybody really talk today about what the specific health implication and how the system in Jamaica or in the United States, how do we deal with the specific healthcare needs of women in jail? Because I know Jamaica is really poor. I'm from Haiti, so we share a lot of similarities. And in the States, so that prison in Jamaica, is it co-ed or is it just strictly?
No, it's a female.
It's a female prison. So how can you speak a little bit more about?
But they complained that if they were sick and they called for the doctor, it was not immediately taken care of. And sometimes they had to wait another week before they could go to the doctor. So the health part is what I had it on the numerous slides that I spoke of. But yes, the health care was inadequate completely. And even the mental, because psychological help was needed by many of them. They were very depressed and they got emotional when we were speaking to them. And there was an absolute need for some support to their mental health, and that was not there either.
And when we visited the prison in January, they did tell us that there was a psychiatrist or psychologist who was available like once a week who would come in, but whether that actually happened or whether people knew that the person was available is another question.
Because when I asked them, are you aware, that's what the prison authority said, yes, there are counseling sessions that are available. But when you ask them, half of them were not even aware that there were such counseling sessions. And I think 45%, if I remember, of those who were aware of it used it because they said it was very infrequent and inadequate. Sometimes you ask for the help and the officer doesn't take you on.
So that's for the mental health issue. But what
I'm talking about the mental. I'm saying.
What about is there any concern for their physical health? I don't know if they're male guards relating to sexual attacks and different.
No,
things
I didn't get anything about that side.
I must say though,
I didn't get any evidence of sexual abuse. What they had was sexual abuse by women of women. Okay. That's what they have reported.
And I wanted to say that's the same thing here in the United States, especially in New York State, that the health care for women is not just inadequate, it's substandard, it's horrible. Women are treated, we have different issues than men, and those issues are not addressed, they're not even written in the policy and procedure, the laws that govern the correctional system. We have a report out on that, a reproductive health report that I contributed to. It's horrible, and it does mirror exactly that. Women get treated badly in any country. Let's just be clear. Women get treated badly in any and every country, right? For whatever the reasons are. I think we know what those reasons are. And when we look at it holistically, you know what I mean? We have to figure out, it's so hard though, because the root cause, like I was saying, I think the root of everything is poverty and what we can do. And I know Jamaica, I still have family in Jamaica. It is so poor. I mean, you have a country that can grow its own food, but grows its own food to get it exported, to get it imported back. So it's free growing up out the ground, but because they have to export it to get it imported back, now it costs $50 to get a bag of rice. Or, you know what I mean, $100 for bread. It just makes no sense. So these are what we do to continue to step on the neck of the oppressed, right? And we keep going, and we keep going, and we keep going. And those are the strongest issues to us.
Okay. Do you want to say something about the health? I think
you have
okay. So very quickly, we'll just give them the last word with your question. Do you have a question?
Wait, I think she had a follow-up.
I just wanted to follow up on your question about healthcare, and there's reproductive injustice. There's a report that came under the prison system in New York State and the lack of reproductive health rights for women. But I just wanted to make a comment which can get into the question around what kind of healthcare people are receiving. In New York State, the only institution in New York State that provides healthcare and is not overseen by the Department of Health is the prison system. So that tells you something.
Great. Well, then, thank you, everyone. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
And I just wanted to jump back up for 1 second because I realized that when I was introducing the program before, I really omitted to introduce Marie-Claude Jean-Baptiste, and didn't she do a fantastic job of guiding the discussion? So we should really give her a hand. She's leading the Human Rights and Access to Justice program at the Vance Center. And there she's working and advising clients on projects related to violence against women, housing rights, transitional justice, prevention of mass atrocities, accountability for grave human rights violations, rights of LGBTI persons. She's just doing great work, and she did wonderful work tonight. So thank you all. And because there was one question about what could we do or how could we be involved as citizens, I happened to notice that the Attorney General of the United States has officially designated April 24th to 30th, so next month, I guess the third week of next month, as National Reentry Week. So I've never heard of that before, but this is to focus attention on people getting out of prison and transitioning out of prison. And so we might Google or go online and see what we could do or how we could be involved in helping people make that very difficult transition from being excommunicated from the world to trying to reintegrate. So thank you all very, very much. I thought it was a wonderful evening.